Is the only reason Ukraine is not winning the war because America's tying their hands behind their back? Basically, is this Washington's fault that they can't seem to get on track? Certainly, that's the thing that a lot of people are saying in the West about it, and mainly in relation to this long-range weapon systems. But as we're going to see later in this episode, it's not just that. A lot of people are accusing Biden administration of dragging his feet and tying a hand behind the back of Zelensky. But before we get there, I want to talk about something because there is a free speech issue involved here. And we have Larry Johnson with us today. Larry the Shirt, one of our favorite guests that we have all the time, former CIA analyst. And but listen, you were the subject of a hit piece in Voice of America that was then publicized. And there's some other things going on before that. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what's going on with you, especially in your YouTube channel.
Yeah, unusual week last week. So my Sonar 21 YouTube channel on Wednesday was taken down. Not just taken down, erased, obliterated, like I hadn't been there before. And I received this nasty message that, hey, we're taking out because you're guilty of hate speech. Now, I've always believed in America that you're innocent until proven guilty, and they provided no proof whatsoever. In fact, when I asked, why have you taken me down? We're not going to tell you. We can't tell you. So I said, oh, okay. So I'm thinking this is something like out of Kafka or out of a Stalinist Soviet Union. Then that was followed 2 days later on Friday with this Voice of America hit piece by this guy named Leonid Martinyuk. Whenever I see the letters NYUK, I always think of the Three Stooges. You remember, yuk.
Right.
But it wasn't a funny piece. It was funny in this regard. He claims that I am this media star, that I'm amplifying nothing but Kremlin propaganda. But who am I amplifying it to? Well, all of the media outlets that are identified that I've spoken to or where I've been quoted, they're published only in Russia. So I guess I've become like the major morale officer for the Russian people, because none of what I've said in either written interviews or video interviews has been published in the United States. So it's like, the way I understood propaganda working when I was at CIA is we put articles out in places where they're published so that people that you want to influence can hear them. Now, here's this masterful Russian plan. They're going to manipulate and meddle in our election by publishing and using media that nobody in the United States gets to see. That is brilliant. I don't know how they do it, but maybe they're trying to use some sort of Jedi mind trick. It's just, so what we're witnessing is actually an assault on our freedom of speech. And there's a video that's up on Facebook now of these two FBI agents climbing out of a car, going up to some guy's house, and he's filming them. And they say, hey, sir, we're here to talk to you about some social media posts. He goes, what's your names? I said, so we got to stop filming us. He goes, no, I'm not going to stop filming you. What's your names? Show me your badge. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. And he says, I have a constitutional right to do this. I'm in my home. I'm broadcasting. I'm saying what I think. That's protected by the Constitution. And they finally snuck off, just walked away. But, this shouldn't even be a possible, consideration that we're banning foreign, they're banning now YouTube on Facebook, and this banning and censoring that's going on instead of debating the ideas, talking about
it. And that's supposed to be central. We're talking Jeffersonian democracy territory where you're supposed to have freedom of conscience to say whatever you want as long as you don't break a law. Now, if you break a law and they say, here's a law and you broke it, okay, now fair enough. Then either you can rectify that or you can just avoid doing it. But when it's just something like, don't like what you're saying, we're going to shut it down. That's a dangerous situation. Obviously, they're going after anybody who's saying anything, I guess, that's not in the official narrative or something, which, of course, honestly makes us concerned here because you don't have to look very far than to see what happened to Scott Ritter. He goes farther in some areas than I do. But I'm a fierce advocate of freedom of speech. And if he thinks those things, he can say whatever he wants as long as he doesn't violate any laws. And so far as I know, he hasn't yet. He was subject to an FBI raid. And, I know that you're concerned about that.
Yeah. And, the charge of hate speech. Look, about 40 years ago in Skokie, Illinois, the ACLU defended the right of a neo-Nazi group, Holocaust deniers, to march and protest in a Jewish neighborhood, largely Jewish neighborhood. And you know what? I commend the ACLU for that. They upheld, even though what was being said by the neo-Nazi crowd was reprehensible, they could say it, but then there's also the rights of those, the Jewish people in that neighborhood had the right to speak back. And so that's what our country was founded on, even being able to allow those extremes. Now, you don't get to go out and threaten, I'm going to kill you, or, because that's assault. That actually gets charged as a criminal act of assault. But but what we're talking about is, being accused that if you say that Ukraine is losing, you're being, quote, engaged in misinformation, even though it's absolutely true.
I mean, it's certifiable true, which we're going to talk about here today. And we certainly hope that that doesn't happen any further to you, and hope you can continue going on, especially there at sonar21.com. And I even hope that you get that YouTube channel back somehow. I recommend that you keep fighting for that, and hope that that'll work, because I never take anything for granted. But listen, folks, if that ever happens to us, if you ever come to and there's no more Daniel Davis channel on YouTube, go to Rumble, because we are not going to stop anywhere. And we just want to have a backup plan. If that happens, we're going to continue promoting anyway, because we will not stop telling the truth. We're going to follow the rule of law, as I've always done in my entire life, and we will do it here. But we are unintimidated and unafraid to tell you the truth, and we're going to do so again right now. So one of the big charges, as I said at the beginning, right now, the Biden administration, is that they're tying the hands of the Ukrainian side, and that's the only thing that's holding them back. And in fact, Zelensky, who's going to be coming to town here in a few days to meet with President Biden to give him his victory plan, said, hey, nothing is impossible for us. Watch this.
Yes, I will speak with him how to strengthen ours before peace summit, to be in a strong position, because diplomatic decisions or solutions, they are good when you are strong. Otherwise, Putin will not even, take place in it. And I think otherwise they will be not interested in any kind of circumstances how they can stop the war. That's why I have the plan. Yes, victorious plan, because for us it's victory, to be very strong and be ready for the strong diplomacy.
So now victory seems to be changing a bit of the definitions here. It used to be 1991 borders, and not 2 weeks ago, Zelensky was talking about a battlefield victory, but now he's saying, well, victory means that we're strong, and that means we want to have a strong negotiating position diplomatically, politically, economically, and militarily. I'm not sure how any of those things are even possible, but let's start with the first portion of what he said there, or what the people are saying, that we're tying Zelensky's hands behind his back. Is that true?
No, because we're preventing him from setting himself on fire and the rest of the world. Yeah, and Michael McCall, this congressman out of Texas, he's been one of the prominent voices talking about that, claiming that the failure of giving Ukraine enough HIMARS, enough Patriots, enough ATACMS, enough JSAMs, and Storm Shadows to fire, quote, deeper into Russia is what's preventing them from, quote, winning. You step back and say, okay, one, do they have enough trained troops? No. Do they have access? Is there a pool of potential recruits that they could access, that they could train up and be equipped? The answer to that is no, they don't have it. And the reason they don't have it is there's no place that they can train in Ukraine where they're not going to be touched by the Russians. So
And just to kind of, because Gary's always on top of this stuff, we actually have one of the thoughts from or sound bites from McCall saying that very thing. Watch this.
This is a sanctuary zone that the Russians have created. And what they're doing is they're lining up all their artillery and rockets and missiles just across the Ukraine border that they then use to attack the Ukrainians. However, your administration and Jake Sullivan have restricted the arms use so that Ukraine cannot defend itself and fire back at Russia. That's why I mandated the ATACMS in the supplemental, the long range, short range, and the HIMARS, that your administration is tying their hands behind their back.
Okay, let's talk about the specifics, because I mean, he had a really cool map and lots of dots on there and ranges and whatever. And so it looks like, yeah, well, you're not even allowing, meaning the U.S. is not allowing Zelensky's forces to fire at these people. So they're just doing it at will. Is that accurate?
Well, not entirely. Yeah, they have imposed limits on, hey, you're not going to use ATACMS and strike Moscow, go after the Kremlin. But that doesn't accomplish anything militarily anyway. All that does is it's just a form of state terrorism. But it is sort of amusing that we can't come up with enough 155 millimeter shells ourselves to provide Ukraine with artillery rounds if they did have artillery pieces that were still functioning. So most of the artillery pieces that we've sent over the what are they? The 777s. They've been destroyed, so they don't have those. We don't have enough ammunition to give them. This has not been a matter of the fact that Ukraine has not been properly equipped and funded. I mean, let's recognize they've received $174 billion since the start of the special military operation. That's equivalent to 20% of the United States defense budget, total defense budget for the world, almost 20%. So it has been, the problem has been that the Russians overmatch the Ukrainians on every count, and we in the West have been refused to accept that. And we don't have a strategic approach. It's that lack of strategic approach that then would dictate doctrine in terms of tactics and what people do. Instead,
and you know, I want to drill down on that a second, because it's important, and I want to expand on it a little bit. It's not that the U.S. has directly tied the hands of Ukraine, though there are very practical and logical reasons why to limit the type of weapons and where it can strike in Russia for some of the reasons you mentioned. But there's a much bigger issue at fault that is exposing some real problems in America's national security. And I'm going to show you, you may have been seeing this. This may be why you're referring to it. But here's Jake Sullivan just a couple of days ago making an admission I don't think he realized he made.
Why is it that it is difficult to supply Ukraine with the speed that the frontline troops need?
From the perspective of the front line, there isn't enough. It isn't fast enough. That is not a function of us sitting around in Washington saying, hey, let's not send them 155 or air defense or Gimlers or HIMARS or Bradleys or F-16s more rapidly. There's not some pacing or rate limitation that we have imposed. There are logistical challenges. There are challenges associated with the defense industrial base and the actual production of munitions. We are literally taking 155 shells off the lines we've stood up since the start of this war, putting them in motion and getting them to the front line as fast as we can.
So here he is admitting that we don't even have enough stuff. And we're grabbing it off everywhere. He subsequently said in that same interview that on air defense interceptor missiles, one of the absolute key components of any modern war is that we're taking them from everywhere else in the world that we are supposed to be giving them to people and throwing them all into Ukraine, and it's still not enough for them. So imagine what our own inventories are looking like. That's what he just admitted here.
Yeah, well, and not only that, when you're talking F-16s as an example, I mean, that aircraft's almost 50 years old. Okay. Oh, it's been modernized. We've improved that. It's a 50-year-old aircraft with basically 50-year-old technology. And we're offering that up as, oh, latest, greatest. But the problem there is we give it, who's going to fly it? There we're back to training, the lack of training. Or you can train somebody to take off and land in it, but that's about it. Then when they have to actually engage in combat, a whole different issue. So it's that combination. I mean, it really is a perfect storm that you don't have enough trained personnel, and that even if you did have trained personnel, we don't have the West, not just Ukraine, the West, the United States and Europe does not have the industrial base to flip the switch, to turn it on so that they are cranking out 155 millimeter shells, M777 howitzers, M1 Abrams tanks, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, just go down the list. We don't have that. And in fact, there are some of the weapon systems that are produced, rely primarily on components that come out of China. So,
yeah. And in fact, I'm not sure if this component, this is one of those with the components, but in addition to all those you just mentioned, there's also our long-range missiles themselves. So one of the things that the Secretary of Defense just admitted the other day in public in the New York Times was he said, because there are not enough ATACMS or British and French missiles to sustain a long-range campaign against Russia. And he said that there's some concerns that they could not supply enough of the munitions to seriously damage a wide range of targets, meaning that even if we wanted to, even if we said, look, there's nothing on your hands at all, we just don't have them to give to you. So again, you see almost every major category of something you're talking about to fight a major warfare, we're running out of it to even give to Ukraine, on top of everything we're giving to Israel, by the way, and stuff that we want to send to Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region. And I keep asking, what about us? What if we get drawn into, say, for example, this war in Russia because we allow long-range weapons? God forbid that we should do that. But if we do get into a war, what are we going to do?
Well, and we've illustrated here that we're not talking about just one weapon system or one thing. It's across the board. Take the Patriot missile as an example. So each Patriot launcher, the total, they can fire off like 16 missiles that come out of it to go attack an inbound missile. So if you've got an inbound missile, the Patriot will fire 2 for every one that's inbound. Well, how many of those does Lockheed Martin make a year? 550 a year. We're not talking a month. We're not talking a week. It's 550, basically 1.5 a day. Well, there was a missile strike. Russia did a missile strike on Ukraine in December, like December 28th of last year. They fired 244 missiles in one day. So think about that. If Ukraine had enough Patriots at that time to fire back at 244 inbound Russian missiles, that means in that one exchange on that one day, Ukraine would have used up almost the entire production of what Lockheed Martin makes in a year. So it's across the board. And wasn't it on your show yesterday with Matt Ho that Matt talked about the debacle with the F-35 in the United States? It's not just what we're supplying, what we're doing to Ukraine. It's what we're doing to ourselves. We're building crap that's really expensive that doesn't work. It work reliably. And then if it gets shot down, boy, we're like, oh, now what do we do?
Yeah, and look, you just see this keeps going back and forth to or going back rather to the point that where it is irrational to continue supporting a war we can't support, one that Ukraine can't win. And yet here we have Zelensky getting ready to come to Biden to say, hey, nothing's impossible for us, man. We can win. And then he's also saying, he was asked by Fareed Zakaria, what about Trump? Have you talked to him yet? Watch this exchange.
I had a phone call with Donald Trump, and he said that he is very supportive, and we had good conversation. That's why.
This is recently? When was?
I had only one during this whole period. Yes, it was, I think, 2 months ago.
And he said he was very supportive.
He will be very supportive, and he understands how it's difficult to survive during the war, and he will do everything to strengthen Ukraine. So I don't know. I mean, that's great that it sounds this way, and but that's why I want to share this plan, to hear his reaction.
Well, now it's interesting that because we obviously have what Trump said during the debate with Kamala Harris about when he was specifically asked, do you want Ukraine to win? He wouldn't answer the question. He says, I want it to be over. So there's that. But then check this out. Here's Lindsey Graham being also asked this past Sunday, what about Trump's plan for winning this war? Watch this.
When it comes to how this thing wraps up, President Trump was pressed the other night about how to win this, what he considers, and he kept saying he just wants to end it. Listen, you've been to Ukraine more than I have. I was talking to Ukrainians this week, though, who say it cannot involve ceding territory to Putin that he took from them. That's not how they see this ending for many reasons. Do you talk to the president about what his plan is if he's reelected to end this thing?
Yeah, he's right to want to end the war in a way not to start a new war. The last person I would listen to about how to end the war is the Biden administration or the Obama team. In 2014, we had an end of the war in Ukraine. It led to another invasion. Here's what Trump will do. He will end the war in a way not to entice China to invade Taiwan. He will end the war in Ukraine in a way to prevent a third invasion. Biden has no plan to end this war that is effective. I am listening to Zelensky. He has a plan that's coming out in about a week. What we need here is an American president that can get Putin and Zelensky in a room to end this war, to make sure we don't have another war.
Okay, so I think all Lindsey Graham is saying here is that, okay, this is not hard. This is easy. This is the equivalent. I would like a triple cheeseburger with cheesy fries with some chili on top and a shake to wash it down. And I would like to lose 5 pounds in the process. That's all I'm asking. When he says, I want to negotiate, I want Trump to negotiate in a way that will not cause another war, that will make Trump happy, Putin happy, that will make Zelensky happy, and will make Kamala Harris sad, because he's got to throw some political stuff in there. But that's just insanity. And Trump, as far as he's going, he didn't say anything like that. He just said he wants to bring it to an end. So is Zelensky setting himself up for a lot of disappointment?
Yes. I mean, he's not going to get what he wants. And I think it's been said before on your show. He wants to get the United States and NATO involved in the war on the shooting side, because he realizes that's his only hope. And saying that's his only hope doesn't mean that it would actually turn out that way, but it's his only path that he can see where they might even have a chance at recouping something in the Donbass. But again, it's not going to happen, because already you're seeing Germany and Poland, they're doing, the Michael Jackson moonwalk backwards from, hey, we're going to get involved with this war. They're moving the opposite direction. So the dissension within NATO ranks, especially in Europe, is increasing. The United States, I think at least somebody over at DOD, maybe it's Cavoli, made it very clear, we're not going to authorize those kinds of strikes deeper into Moscow or into Russia by Ukraine, because then we're going to wind up with dead American soldiers over here. And then we could be on our way to a nuclear war. We're not going to go down that path. We can't afford it, because we frankly could not fight it and win it right now.
And okay, so I haven't seen that from Cavoli. That's good on him if he said the truth.
Well, I don't know if he said that, but I'm saying I'm thinking through the list of possible people with some measure of sanity. He strikes me as one that's,
fair enough. But whoever may have said it, maybe it's Larry Johnson. So good on you if you did, because that's what the realities on the ground scream. But there are others certainly are screaming something different. And here is John Bolton. I probably don't even say much beyond this, but here's John Bolton saying that, this is really not a big deal, because Putin's definitely not going to do anything, because, well, he'd be crazy to do so. So we're safe. Watch this.
If you're worried about what Putin said and we react accordingly, you're going to give him what he wants at absolutely no cost to him. My response to Putin's remark, as to earlier threats involving nuclear weapons, is to say to him, privately and publicly, if Russia uses a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has signed his personal death warrant.
So apparently, in Bolton's way of thinking, here's how things work. There's a war between these two sides. One side fires a weapon into Russia. Russia then fires presumably a conventional weapon into somewhere in NATO. And then in response, NATO fires a nuclear missile into Moscow and kills Putin. Game over. And boy, is Putin sad. And we
win. And we win. Yay, victory.
Is that how it would work?
No. I mean, this, we refuse to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person in order to understand how they might see the world. And in encouraging us to do that, I'm not suggesting that we, quote, surrender our values or surrender our what we consider important. But if Russia was providing missiles to the Mexican drug cartel that were being used to strike civilian targets in Dallas, in San Antonio, in Houston, in Albuquerque, in Flagstaff, we would be a tad upset. In fact, I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that we would view that as an act of war, that we would retaliate not only against the Mexican drug cartels, but we would retaliate against Russia for having supplied them. So why is it that when we have the same sort of situation, except we're the ones that are supplying the weapons, we're the ones providing the targeting data? I mean, those rockets don't get to that point without satellite information. And so all of a sudden, we are accessories. We are facilitators of murder. And then we're going to be surprised when the Russians strike back. What Bolton said right there illustrates the biggest danger we face right now, because he's not alone. There are many people at senior levels in the intelligence community, in the Department of Defense, in Congress that insist, that Putin, he's just full of hot air. He's just shooting his mouth off. He's not really going to do it until he does. And they have made it clear that it wasn't just Putin. It was Nebenzia, the ambassador at the United Nations for Russia. And it was the Russian ambassador in Washington. They made it clear that Russia will hit here in the United States. Okay, if you want to play that game and take that risk, I wish it was just,
Yeah. You'd like to say if you want to do that with your house, that's fine. Unfortunately, it's our country.
Yeah.
And so I'm unfortunately not okay with that. And look, I want to go down the path of one of the comments that you just said there about, understanding what the other side thinks used to be basic strategy, ergo Sun Tzu. If you don't know your enemy or yourself, you'll probably lose every battle. But you have to know yourself and your enemy and how they think if you want to have any chance at making good policies. And unfortunately, we either turn a caricature of the other side and say that, they're all evil and no thought process, no morality or whatever. So it's just a caricature. It's not even real. Or we just ignore them entirely and say, oh, you can't listen to them. And that harms us. And that's why that just infuriates me, like something like Putin, Bolton here, because his actions advocate things that are going to harm us. And I'm talking could get millions of people killed here in the United States and start a nuclear war. That's one of the reasons why I'm so upset about this. And look, it's something that we need. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one other question I wanted to ask you, because in one of the shows we did, maybe even earlier today, I can't remember. We had one of the members of the British. Yeah, there you go. We had a former MI6 member of Britain talking about this issue of long range. Now, he wasn't quite as flippant as Bolton, because he said, well, there is a risk of retaliation if we use these long range missiles, but it would be in the gray zone or something, because obviously Putin is not going to go and engage directly against NATO forces. He doesn't want a war with NATO because he knows he couldn't win. I'm sure part of that's right. Putin definitely does not want a war with NATO at all. But is he safe in saying it would be a gray zone situation? They would hit our assets elsewhere. could cause some economic damage or something like that. So it would be I think the word he used, it would be inconvenient for British citizens, etc. Is that a safe bet?
No. And let's draw an example from what just happened in Israel with the Houthis. Nobody imagined that the Houthis had a hypersonic missile, and that they would launch a hypersonic missile, and that it would hit a target in Tel Aviv that the air defense systems of Israel and the United States could not stop. There's just a recent example of something that nobody imagined possible. They wouldn't do that. They couldn't do that. They did it. They did it, and we don't know if they've got the ability to do it again. What's clear is they didn't do it on their own. They had help. So take that same principle, apply it up here to Russia, because Russia has what we do not. They have at least 2 or 3 variants of the hypersonic missiles. And what that means is these are missiles that are traveling at least 5 times the speed of sound, except the Russians are the only ones who've developed one that travels 10 times the speed of sound and is able to maneuver with communications links. If people that can remember back when we used to have astronauts that would go to space and they'd come back in the space capsules, and while they're in that re-entry, as that is descending at Mach 10, all of a sudden the communications gets blacked out because of the plasma effect that's created around it. Well, that's what happens to these hypersonic missiles, except the Russians have solved one of those problems that we cannot. The United States does not have an operational hypersonic missile. We just do not have it. And yet we're talking about going up against the Russians, who've got 3 variants of it. They can destroy ships. They can destroy any of our military targets.
Well, let's talk this out for a minute, because it's not an obvious no. Because for Russia to do this, and certainly Putin, Lavrov, Ryabkov, and the Russian UN ambassadors you just mentioned have all very recently stated, I think Peskov has echoed some of this as well here in just the last 24 or so hours, that they would retaliate and respond in an appropriate manner against the West. So it leaves it unspecified. But of course, Putin did use the word, it would be an act of war for the Western side to use that. So it's the first time he's used that language connected with us and have appropriate measures to an act of war. So it implies that they would. What is the range of possibilities? Because true enough, if Russia, and let's just create a hypothetical situation here, the U.S. gives permission to the British to fire a Storm Shadow missile, and it strikes a strategic target at a military base outside of Moscow, for example, and they blow up, who knows, some Su-57s or whatever, some other kind of aircraft, and it blows up a target on the Russian side there. What is the range of possibilities that Russia could do? Because if they launch a missile anywhere, like against a British warship on British territory, you've got the automatic potential for Article 5 will at least be raised, and then the possibility of war. Would Russia genuinely risk that for a missile strike?
No, actually, I think what they would do is what made those missile strikes possible are satellite communication, intelligence from satellites. The Russians would take out satellites. I think that'd be their first response, because they take out the satellites, they blind us, number one, but they haven't killed anybody directly. And so you don't have, smoking bodies and crumbled wreckage, but they will have blinded us and sent a signal that, because they can take us out in a way that we can't take them out. Number one. Remember, we can't even get our astronauts up and back from the space station. Okay. So we need to stop looking in the mirror and telling everybody that we're the prettiest of them all when we can't even do some basic things that we did 60 years ago, 50 years ago. But then when the Russians retaliate, they will go after, as they've proven what they've done in Ukraine, they've been very, very careful about not hitting civilian targets. They may have had 1 or 2 that have gone astray, but by and large, when they hit solid military targets. They kill military personnel. They destroy either power plants or equipment or factories. And so what they would expand is this would then go into Romania and to Poland, where staging bases are for a lot of these missile systems. They could potentially target Ramstein, where the actual targeting work is done. So, and again, they've got the ability to do that.
So let's work on this out a little bit. What would that look like on the Western side? Because the Western side believes they are basically impervious. They say Russia would never do that. And even taking out a satellite, even though there wouldn't be any body counts, that's a huge issue, which would freak out everybody. And I can imagine that everyone, no matter what it would be, would say that definitely triggers an Article 5 meeting. Let's get together and talk about this. What would they do? Because they can't just go all in, because if we retaliate then directly against Russia, I think, now tell me what you think, is that Russia's threshold for tactical nuclear weapons use is way lower than ours, and probably lower than anybody on the West thinks it is. And if we're directly attacking, not even through the proxy, but if we're directly attacking any military target in Russia, I think it's quite possible that a nuclear missile tactically follows.
Well, I think the Russian general staff, the planners, they've been pretty prudent about assessing what can we accomplish with a conventional warhead, and I think they still view the tactical as a last resort. If they're facing the possibility of a weapon system being launched at Russia that could contain a nuclear weapon, and they are not convinced that their conventional force could take it out, then I think under that circumstance, yeah, they would probably use a tactical nuke. But I think they're going to take great pains to avoid that, and they're still, ratcheting the pain factor up on us bit by bit. As you're watching the acceleration of this offensive that the Russians have underway in Donbass, I mean, it's stunning. And so the Ukrainians are getting swept both in the Donbass and up in Kursk right now, and they don't have an answer for it. So faced in that kind of situation, I don't see the Russians as being in a desperate do or die, we've got to do this or else, and run the risk of a nuclear war erupting.
Well, maybe to bolster your point here, there was a recording made, I think it was yesterday, by the Akhmet Special Forces Commander Alaudinov. I may not be pronouncing that correctly. He was answering the question that many have said that, oh, well, look, Russia's conventionally, they're a weak stick because they can't even get rid of that incursion into Kursk after now a month and a half nearly. And he says, well, that's because you don't understand how we actually are doing business. Here's what we're actually intending. Watch this.
I've said this many times before. If anyone is wondering why we're not taking faster action, they must understand that if we rush for quick victories, we would have to sacrifice many lives, many young men.
Они тебя заставляют совершать какие-то поступки, потому что у тебя такое состояние еще не полного
This is
понимания.
unacceptable for us. We don't need a victory today only to lose tomorrow.
Оно становится осознанным, и осознанно, когда ты начинаешь понимать, что такое.
Our strategy is to advance by depleting the enemy's resources, step by step.
In that same interview, he also specifically about the Kursk area, he said one of the reasons why we have not moved in with a lot of forces is because we want them to keep throwing reserves in there, and we'll just keep attriting their forces down. So they're not moving fast. They're not doing it the way that we think that they should, but they're doing it in a way that methodically almost can't fail militarily. So I guess then if you're looking at that in the strategic picture, that's a tactical situation, then their actions may be equally calculated to preserve their own lives, because they're much more worried about that than we give them credit for, but still in a way that's going to lead to victory. The big problem that I have, and I'm really worried about it, is I don't see a lot of that rational thinking on our side of the equation.
No, exactly. Well, you remember during World War II, and I think on the Battle of Okinawa, the Marines had one strategy where they would basically put a lot of Marines at risk and get a lot of Marines killed and wounded. The Army, U.S. Army, by contrast, was much more cautious in using attrition strategy and artillery strikes instead of using, troops rushing forward and getting them killed. So the U.S. Army suffered far fewer casualties in that. And it's good, here you're seeing Aludinov. I think they pronounce it Aludinov, but I could be wrong too on that. But, they're recognizing we're not going to get our young men killed. And that has been reflected across the board throughout this operation, where the Russians have sought to minimize their own casualties because they're not on a clock. This is not like, a basketball game and you're in the fourth quarter and you only got 1 minute left to play. The Russians control the clock. They're quite happy to attrit the Ukrainian army and what they've discovered, because I don't think they'd originally imagined this was possible, but they've ended up attriting NATO and the United States. It has exposed some extraordinary weaknesses, despite the United States having an $850 billion defense budget, to realize we can't produce more than 550 Patriot missiles. We can't produce enough artillery shells to sustain Ukraine in the field for 2 weeks. We can't produce any more Abrams tanks. We're having trouble producing HIMARS. We're having trouble producing ATACMS. We don't produce JSAMs anymore. It's down the list.
Yeah. And so that interesting that you use that analogy about the clock. Russia's not on a clock. They don't have anything to worry about. We do. We are on a clock. And I'm going to ask you in our last little segment here a question that I asked Matt Ho a couple of days ago, because there is a real genuine dilemma in the White House right now. And I'd like to see how you see this. So Biden is very much on a clock, because Zelensky is coming up here in just a few days, and he's going to give him this so-called victory plan. And he's definitely going to want to use long-range weapons to be able to attack Russia, to make them weak, to make them, as he said in subsequent interviews, hurt enough so that they'll come to the table and negotiate in a direction that's beneficial to Kiev. That's fantasy thinking, but that's not the point here, because that's what he's going to ask for. Biden then is going to be in this position, either in an election year, barely 2 months from an election. He's going to either have to say, no, we're not going to do that. And then he's going to come under withering fire from the Boltons and the Zelensky, or the Lindsey Grahams and a bunch of others who have already seen are going to say, you're weak, you're hanging our friends out to dry, you're terrible, all this stuff, when he's trying to win an election. And of course, all this gets put onto Kamala Harris, because she's now, trying to fill in the gap here, and she's the vice president right now. So she will be tarred with all of this, because the Republicans will make sure she gets tarred with it. So he's got that to consider. But if he says yes to this, and again, days away, then he's got the risk that Russia makes good on its promises, and we also get drawn into a war, which is generally not a good way to win an election either, to draw them into a war with a nuclear power. So those are two really genuine, no kidding, political problems for the president, which have tremendous ramifications. How do you see him navigating this?
Well, I don't see him actually being the decision maker. So what we're looking at is, what are Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, what's that little cabal going to do? They recognize that right now there is not any kind of political support in the United States for expanding the war, getting the United States in on the ground with Ukraine. One of the things I think they could change and increase, let's say, create the imperative for U.S. to get involved, is if there is some sort of dramatic false flag where it's perceived that the Russians have killed a lot of American civilians, or killed a large number of Ukrainian civilians. And I don't put it past the Ukrainians doing that. They did it in that village, was it Bucha? If you recall, it was 1st of April of 2022, where the Russians were accused of having murdered all of these Ukrainian civilians, except the Ukrainian civilians that were found dead were all wearing the white armbands that signaled that they were favoring the Russians. And the other signals intelligence had proven that the Russians had pulled out of that village well in advance. So those people were killed by the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians went in and killed their own citizens in order to make it look like this had been a massacre or war crime carried out by the Russians.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I don't put it past them doing something like
yeah,
that
no,
now.
certainly if I'm concerned about any kind of false flag by anybody, because I don't put it past anybody. All
Yeah.
sides can and have done to certain things, because all war is about deception. And so I accept that as the case. But right now I'm focused on what is the White House, whether it's Biden or somebody else encouraging him, whatever. It is a real dilemma that he's got to face here. So how do they navigate this? And just literally like within the next week or so.
Yeah, well, they'll kick the can down the road until the election. I don't see them taking any action that's going to risk the possibility of actual going toe to toe with the Russians in a shooting war. They'll wait till the election. If Kamala Harris wins, then I think they could actually green light it and say, okay, now that we've got her in through the door, she's going to be elected. They could then take the risk. But I don't see them doing something prior to November, because I think what they're trying to do is avoid another abandoning Afghanistan, facing a major loss,
Right.
having a major loss of face prior to that election. They want to continue to project strength. And let's remember the other element in play here is what's going on in Israel, because the Israelis are out of control as well. And I don't think we've ever been in a situation like this, Danny, in the last 100 years, where we've had two flashpoints like this that are so potentially volatile that either one could go in a way that could blow the world up. And we've got somebody in the White House that is not mentally competent, and he's surrounded by a bunch of mental midgets themselves that are not thinking strategically at all.
Yeah, that's a lot of the trouble and a lot of things that concern me here. But I think they're going to have a hard time with this kick the can down the road strategy, because the election are close in one hand, but not in the other, because Zelensky's going to leave here on the 25th of September after he gives his UN General Assembly speech. And if he goes back and he doesn't have permission, if they say they're still thinking about it, I mean, there's only so long you can cover that. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the kick the can down the road is going to work, but I probably that's the least risky for them to try to do, as opposed to either conclusively making a decision, yes or no. So probably you're going to end up being right, but I'm just not sure that they're going to be able to work that out.
Well, the other problem here for Zelensky is his popularity is plummeting. It's not rising. It'd be one thing if he was a fan favorite over in Ukraine, but he's not. And his political base is very fragile. And so his ability to really command the forces and march them on. Even he admitted the other day in that interview with Fareed Zakaria, which I know you've covered, about the fact that the Kursk operation was a risk. He was fully on board with it. And I imagine there are some colleagues of soldiers who died in that operation who are not going to be terribly happy with Zelensky. And you can't rule out the possibility of someone taking revenge on that front.
And especially if he leaves here after his speech, doesn't get the approval to use long range missiles, and then all of a sudden that Kursk salient does start to literally get crushed and collapse, or they withdraw from it, or there happens to be a breakthrough in the Pokrovsk area or the Vuhledar Falls or something like that. There's going to be a lot more pressure on the White House to then say yes, or then they're going to say you truly are abandoning them, and then you're going to get another Afghan stuff. Again, the closer you get to the election, the sharper those attacks are going to be. Bottom line is there is a lot of room here for trouble that can get us drawn into a war, and I'm really concerned about it.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, it's not exaggerating to say it's the most. I can't remember a time of such potential danger. During the worst times in the Cold War, we were never at this kind of risk with the Soviets. So it is, and at least then we still had some people in leadership positions. I mean, we had a George Shultz at State Department. The man was really a towering giant of great competence. Or even Jim Baker, who was Secretary of State and then had for George H.W. Bush. Brent Scowcroft, we had some really solid people. We got a clown show now. I mean, a demented clown show.
Yeah, this just shows the danger of. I mean, it sounds trite to even say it, but when you have a popularity contest for the White House, and believe me, this is across the board, Republican, Democrat. You hire popular people, they get their friends in who exhibit this or that other skill, whatever, to put them in these positions. And what's not on the criteria list is skill and capability.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I don't see really much of a chance, no matter who wins this election, in terms of the people I've heard being considered for senior positions. They both scare me, and that's just the way it is right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We've lost the ability to think strategically.
Yeah, we really have. And we'll have to pray that doesn't come back to bite us in the butt one of these days, because we certainly need somebody to step up and to get some things done. And I just pray to God that we're able to avoid some of these bigger catastrophes so that we have time to start correcting things in the future. But we'll leave it there for now. And we'll continue to follow this story as it happens. And again, remind everybody, please go to sonar21.com, where Larry can still be found, at least as of the moment here. Also remind everybody that we have Colonel Doug McGregor coming back on at noon tomorrow. Definitely don't want to miss that show. And by the way, we also have coming on, I haven't got to nail down the exact time yet. We're going to have, believe it or not, General Ben Hodges on the show, and he has agreed to come on. We have called out some of his advice and commentary a lot in the past. He has agreed to come on and give his side of the story. And we often talk here on this channel about that we're not just an echo chamber. And so we're going to show that we are going to invite somebody on who has a very different view than us. But we're open-minded to see what he has to say. And by all accounts, he is an absolute gentleman. So this is not going to be any kind of an adversarial deal. We're going to give him a chance to talk, and you're going to get a chance to make up your own mind on that. But just be watching for that. We will publicize that very soon. In the meantime, we also ask you to or make you aware, rather, that we're now on podcast, because I know a lot of people don't have the ability to watch videos all the time if you're driving or just doing some other things. So you can now find us anywhere you find your podcast: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and several other places. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You got to type that all in there, and you will find us there and waiting for you. Talk to you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.